Sacrificial altars drenched in blood, relentless battles that leave no survivors, families torn apart by betrayal and tragedy. These may sound like the hallmarks of a chilling horror movie or a grim novel. But, to the surprise of many, these tales of terror come straight from one of the most read books in history, the Bible. Long before the stories of hope and salvation took center stage, the world in which these events unfolded was one of raw survival, divine wrath, and unrelenting judgment. To understand the darker side of the scriptures, we must first step into the ancient world, a time when the line between the spiritual and the physical was blurred, and the fear of the unknown shaped every aspect of life. The lands of the Bible were as diverse as they were dangerous. In the sprawling deserts of the Near East, nomadic tribes roamed under blistering suns, their survival hinging on livestock, trade, and the protection of tribal gods. Cities like Babylon, Nineveh, and Jericho stood as bastions of civilization, yet within their high walls were practices that would horrify modern sensibilities. Human sacrifice, for example, was not uncommon. Archaeological evidence from the region reveals altars stained with the remnants of rituals meant to appease deities like Molech, a god associated with fire and destruction. The cries of children offered in sacrifice would echo across valleys, a grim reminder of the lengths humans would go to seek favor or avert disaster. The ancient Hebrews, too, lived amidst these practices, but their relationship with the divine was distinct. Their God, Yahweh, demanded obedience and reverence but stood against such acts of barbarism. Yet, even among his followers, moments of terror emerged. Consider the binding of Isaac, one of the Bible's most debated and unsettling accounts. Abraham, the father of faith, was commanded by God to sacrifice his beloved son. Though God ultimately intervened, sparing Isaac, the psychological horror of that moment, the knife raised, the child bound, cannot be overstated. These stories were more than tales passed down through generations, they were reflections of a world steeped in spiritual fear and awe. The ancients believed that gods walked among men, that divine beings could punish or reward with a whim. This worldview fostered customs that might seem alien today. Funeral rites were elaborate, designed to ensure a safe passage to the afterlife, while omens and dreams dictated decisions as important as war or marriage. But why does the Bible preserve such stories? Why recount moments of bloodshed, betrayal, and despair? Perhaps it is because these tales serve as a mirror, reflecting both the darkness of humanity and the divine light that seeks to pierce through it. And so, as we journey through the shadowy chapters of Scripture, prepare to face the fearsome, the unthinkable, and the awe-inspiring. For in this world of sacred terror, each story is a doorway to understanding a time when life and death were determined by forces beyond comprehension. Let us begin, then, with one of the most chilling tales of divine judgment, a king's desperate attempt to contact the dead. In the dimly lit tent of a troubled king, shadows danced on the fabric walls as despair weighed heavy in the air. King Saul, the once anointed ruler of Israel, found himself abandoned by his people, his prophet, and even his God. His enemies closed in, and with no answers from heaven, he turned to the forbidden. This is the tale of the Witch of Endor, a story as eerie as it is tragic. To grasp the full gravity of Saul's actions, we must step back into the world of ancient Israel. Saul, chosen by God as the first king of Israel, began his reign with promise but spiraled into paranoia and disobedience. He was a man caught between divine expectations and human frailty, ultimately forsaken by Samuel, the prophet who had once guided him. With Samuel's death, the voice of God seemed distant, leaving Saul adrift in a sea of silence. The practice Saul turned to, necromancy, was strictly forbidden in the Hebrew scriptures. The Torah explicitly condemns calling upon the dead, labeling it an abomination, Deuteronomy 18 verses 10 to 12. The Hebrew term used for such practices, obi, referred to mediums who acted as vessels for spirits. These practitioners often worked in secret, as their craft was punishable by death under Israelite law. Saul himself had enforced these laws, driving out mediums and sorcerers from the land, yet now, in desperation, he sought one out. The journey to Endor was perilous. Under the cover of darkness, Saul and his men traveled to the territory controlled by the Philistines, risking capture. Disguised to conceal his royal identity, Saul approached a woman known for her forbidden craft. The Witch of Endor, as she would later be called, lived on the fringes of society, both physically and spiritually. Her role was one of secrecy, feared yet sought after in moments of despair. When Saul requested that she summon the spirit of Samuel, the woman hesitated, fearing a trap. "Surely you know what Saul has done," she said, her voice trembling. Yet, convinced by Saul's oath of safety, she agreed. The scene that followed is as chilling as it is mysterious. As she began her ritual, she cried out in terror, recognizing Saul's true identity. But what she saw next was far more alarming, the spirit of Samuel, rising from the shadowy depths. The description of Samuel's apparition is brief but impactful. The text in 1 Samuel 28 verses 13 to 14 states, "I saw a God coming up out of the earth." The term God here, Elohim, often refers to divine or supernatural beings. This word choice amplifies the unease. Was this truly Samuel, or something more sinister? Scholars and theologians have debated this moment for centuries. Some argue that God allowed Samuel to appear as a divine act, others suggest the spirit was a demonic impersonation. What followed was a conversation laced with dread. The spirit, identified as Samuel, condemned Saul for his disobedience and foretold his doom. "Tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me," the spirit declared, foretelling Saul's death and Israel's defeat. The weight of these words crushed Saul, leaving him prostrate on the ground, consumed by fear and hopelessness. This story is more than a tale of supernatural terror, it is a sobering reflection on the consequences of forsaking God. Saul's descent into necromancy underscores the fragility of his faith and the despair that drives men to dark places. In his attempt to control the uncontrollable, Saul only sealed his fate. The story of the Witch of Endor also challenges us to consider the blurred lines between fear and faith in the ancient world. The Israelites lived in a time when the spiritual realm was palpably real, and fear of divine retribution governed their lives. Saul's actions, while condemned, reveal the human desperation to seek answers when all seems lost. And so, the tale leaves us with questions that echo through time. When faced with silence from above, how far will one go to seek answers? Is it possible to summon wisdom from the past without inviting darkness into the present? As we leave Endor behind, our journey leads us to another tale of divine judgment and fearsome retribution, a rebellion that shook the earth and swallowed its leaders whole. Imagine a moment when the ground beneath your feet trembles, not with the promise of life, but with the threat of death. In the wilderness, among a people who had seen miracles and wonders, came one of the most chilling acts of divine judgment. It was a day when the earth itself became an executioner, swallowing the rebellious whole. This is the story of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, a tale of defiance, divine wrath, and the terror of losing one's footing in every sense of the word. To understand this story, we must return to the time of the Exodus, a period of liberation, but also of uncertainty and trial. The Israelites, freshly freed from slavery in Egypt, were a people in transition. Their journey through the wilderness was both physical and spiritual, as they learned to trust in Yahweh, the God who had parted the Red Sea. Yet, this trust was fragile, often shattered by doubt, fear, and rebellion. The story unfolds in the book of Numbers, chapter 16. Korah, a Levite, alongside Dathan and Abiram, leaders from the tribe of Reuben, challenged the authority of Moses and Aaron. At the heart of their rebellion was jealousy and ambition. Korah, though a Levite, was not satisfied with his role in caring for the sacred objects of the tabernacle. He wanted the priesthood, a role reserved for Aaron and his descendants. Dathan and Abiram, representing the tribe of Reuben, likely felt resentment as descendants of Jacob's firstborn son, believing their tribe deserved more prominence. Korah's words were sharp and calculated, designed to sow division among the people. "You have gone too far," he accused Moses and Aaron. "The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly?" On the surface, his argument seemed reasonable. After all, had not God declared Israel to be a holy nation? Yet, beneath this veneer of righteousness lay a dangerous pride, a refusal to accept the divine order established by God himself. The rebellion wasn't merely a political dispute, it was a challenge to the very structure of Israel's covenant with God. Moses, deeply grieved, fell face down before the Lord, seeking guidance. In response, he proposed a test. Korah and his followers were to bring censers filled with incense to the entrance of the tabernacle, where God would reveal whom he had chosen. As the sun rose the next day, the scene was set. Korah, along with 250 prominent leaders of Israel, stood before the tabernacle, censers in hand. The air was thick with tension, as the congregation gathered to witness what would unfold. Meanwhile, Dathan and Abiram, defiantly refusing to appear, remained in their tents, a further display of their disdain for Moses' leadership. What happened next defied comprehension. Moses, under divine inspiration, warned the people to distance themselves from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. With the assembly looking on, Moses declared that if these men died a natural death, it would prove he was not sent by God. But if the Lord creates something new, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up, he proclaimed, then you will know that these men have despised the Lord. No sooner had Moses finished speaking than the earth beneath the rebels' tents split apart. The ground opened wide, swallowing Korah, Dathan, Abiram, their families, and all their possessions. The cries of the doomed echoed as the earth closed over them, silencing their rebellion forever. Simultaneously, fire from the Lord consumed the 250 men offering incense at the tabernacle. This event was not just a punishment, it was a terrifying display of divine power and authority. The Hebrew word used for swallow, bala, conveys the idea of being consumed or devoured, a fate that left no trace of the rebels. The earth, normally a source of stability and life, became an instrument of judgment, leaving the people of Israel trembling with fear. The story of Korah's rebellion is a stark reminder of the consequences of pride and defiance against divine order. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about justice and authority in a world where human ambition often clashes with divine will. For the Israelites, it was a lesson etched not in stone, but in the very ground they walked on, a warning to respect the sacred boundaries set by God. Yet, even in this story of terror and judgment, there are glimmers of grace. The descendants of Korah, though spared that day, would later become composers of some of the most beautiful psalms in the Bible, including Psalm 46, "God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble." From the depths of their ancestors' fall came a legacy of worship and humility. As the dust settled and silence returned to the camp, the people of Israel were left to ponder the magnitude of what they had witnessed. The ground they stood on now carried the weight of a divine message, a message that would echo through generations. But this is not the only story where God's power manifested in ways that inspired both terror and reverence. Let us ascend to another scene, atop a trembling mountain, where the heavens themselves seemed to break open. A shroud of thick, dark clouds descended over the mountain. Lightning flashed, illuminating the rugged peaks as the ground shook violently. The air was thick with the sound of trumpets, growing louder and louder, piercing the hearts of all who heard it. What should have been a moment of divine revelation turned into one of overwhelming dread, a scene so fearsome that even Moses, the chosen mediator, confessed, "I am trembling with fear." This is Mount Sinai, where heaven and earth collided. To understand the sheer terror of Sinai, we must explore the cultural and spiritual context of the Israelites at that time. They were a people recently freed from slavery, wandering in the wilderness, carrying the weight of a miraculous deliverance but also the uncertainty of an unknown future. God had led them with pillars of cloud and fire, but now he was about to reveal his covenant in a way that would leave an indelible mark on their collective memory. The setting was no accident. Mountains were seen in ancient cultures as places of divine encounter, a bridge between the heavens and the earth. For the Israelites, Sinai was sacred ground, where Yahweh would establish his laws and confirm his covenant. Yet, what transpired there was not a gentle exchange but a manifestation of God's holiness so overwhelming that it bordered on terrifying. Exodus 19 provides the vivid details. The people were instructed to prepare themselves for 3 days, washing their clothes and abstaining from certain activities to purify themselves. A boundary was set around the mountain, and anyone who crossed it, man or beast, would be put to death. This separation emphasized the unapproachable holiness of God. The Hebrew word for holy, kadosh, means set apart. Here, this concept was brought to life in the starkest terms. On the 3rd day, the spectacle began. The mountain was covered in a thick cloud, and smoke billowed as if from a furnace, accompanied by flashes of lightning and peals of thunder. The sound of a trumpet blast, a shofar, made from a ram's horn, grew louder and more intense, as if signaling the arrival of a divine king. The earth quaked beneath their feet, and the Israelites stood at the base of the mountain, trembling in awe and terror. The voice of God then thundered from the mountain, delivering the 10 Commandments, a moment that was both awe-inspiring and paralyzing. The people, overwhelmed, begged Moses to intercede. "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen," they said. "But do not have God speak to us, or we will die." The fear was not irrational. In their worldview, an encounter with the divine often meant death, as no mortal could withstand the full glory of God's presence. Moses, however, ascended the mountain alone to receive the full law. This act of mediation was crucial, as it reflected the role Moses would play throughout the Exodus journey, a bridge between God and his people. Yet even Moses, despite his close relationship with Yahweh, approached Sinai with trembling. The book of Hebrews later recounts this event, underscoring its profound impact on both Moses and the Israelites. The terror of Mount Sinai was not arbitrary, it was deeply symbolic. It highlighted the chasm between the holiness of God and the sinfulness of humanity. The unapproachable nature of the mountain, the trembling earth, and the booming voice of God all pointed to a truth that the Israelites would carry forward. Approaching God required reverence, obedience, and often a mediator. Yet, this moment of dread also carried a message of hope. The law given at Sinai would form the foundation of Israel's identity as God's chosen people. It was a covenant not built on fear but on relationship, with the 10 Commandments serving as guiding principles for a community called to reflect God's character. As the Israelites retreated from the mountain, they were left to grapple with what they had experienced. The fear lingered, but so did a sense of awe and responsibility. Sinai became a touchstone in their history, a place where the terror of God's presence was matched by the promise of his guidance. Bones. Dry, lifeless bones, scattered across a desolate valley. No sound but the wind sweeping through the hollow remains of what once was. The scene is one of absolute despair, a vision of death so final, so complete, that it seems irredeemable. Yet, from this grim silence rises a voice, "Son of man, can these bones live?" A question not only for a prophet but for anyone who dares to hope when hope seems impossible. The vision of the Valley of Dry Bones, recorded in Ezekiel 37, is both haunting and profound. Ezekiel, a prophet of exile, lived during one of Israel's darkest periods. Jerusalem had fallen, the temple lay in ruins, and the people of God were scattered, captives in a foreign land. For them, this was not just a physical exile, it was spiritual death, a severing of their identity and connection to Yahweh. The valley Ezekiel saw in his vision symbolized this very despair. The bones were not merely dead, they were dry, stripped of flesh, exposed to the elements for what seemed like an eternity. In the ancient Near East, a proper burial was essential to honor the dead and preserve their dignity. These bones, left abandoned, spoke of utter shame and hopelessness, a people forgotten by time and by God. And yet, God's question to Ezekiel pierced through the despair, can these bones live? The question seems absurd. By all logic, no. Bones don't come back to life. Death is the final chapter, the ultimate conclusion. But Ezekiel, standing in the presence of the Almighty, answers with reverence and humility, "Sovereign Lord, you alone know." What follows is one of the most vivid depictions of restoration in all of Scripture. God commands Ezekiel to prophesy over the bones, and as he does, the ground begins to tremble. A sound fills the air, the rattling of bones coming together. Piece by piece, they assemble, sinews and flesh forming over them. But even then, they remain lifeless. It is only when God commands Ezekiel to call upon the wind, the ruach, a Hebrew word meaning breath, spirit, or wind, that life enters them. The valley transforms into a vast army, standing alive and renewed. This story is more than a vision, it is a declaration. It proclaims that no situation is beyond God's power to redeem. It shouts into the void that death, no matter how complete, is not the end when God is involved. The dry bones were a metaphor for Israel, a nation broken and scattered, but they are also a mirror held up to humanity. How often do we find ourselves in a valley of despair, convinced that our failures, our losses, or our sins are too great to overcome? But here's the unsettling truth, the question God asks Ezekiel, can these bones live? Is the same question posed to each of us. It forces us to confront our beliefs about hope, life, and the power of God. Do we truly believe that what is dead can be brought back to life? Or have we resigned ourselves to the finality of our valleys? Even more haunting is the realization that sometimes, we are those dry bones. Spiritually lifeless, stripped of purpose, and too far gone to save ourselves. Yet, just as the wind brought life to that valley, the Spirit of God is capable of breathing life into the most desolate of souls. But here's the catch, it requires a willingness to listen, to respond, and to be moved. The Valley of Dry Bones is not just a story of restoration, it is a challenge. It dares us to believe in the impossible, to trust in the God who turns graves into gardens, who transforms fear into faith. But it also leaves us with a question, what will you do when you hear the rattling? Think about that for a moment. Have you heard it? That faint, distant sound of bones stirring, of life returning to what was once dead? Perhaps it's a whisper in your heart, a pull you can't quite explain, a chance to rise from whatever valley you're in. The question isn't whether God can restore, you've seen the evidence in these stories of terror and awe. The question is whether you'll let him. The Bible's darkest tales, the Witch of Endor, Korah's rebellion, Mount Sinai, and the Valley of Dry Bones, are more than ancient accounts of fear and judgment. They are reflections of the human condition, of our need for a power greater than ourselves. They remind us of both the fragility and the resilience of life, of the consequences of defiance and the promise of restoration.